Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as skeptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Still Unbelievable. This time we're going for a deconstruction of a deconstruction. What that means in real words is that we as former Christians, now atheists, feel that all too often when Christians feel that they want to talk about our experience, that they spend far too long interpreting our experience through what makes them comfortable and not enough time actually paying attention to what we say about our own experience. And we all, and that's all the people on this episode who you'll find out a bit later, and other former Christians who we all know personally and through the podcasting medium, we all feel that Christians need to hear what we say, and they need to stop telling us how our minds work and how our feelings are motivating them. So with that said, we've got our usual host, Andrew. Welcome back on, Andrew. It has been a busy week. It's going to be a busier week, and we're going to be busy next week too. So thank you for sitting down and taking a breath of fresh air so we can record something.
I'm looking forward to this one particularly. And I may start giving conclusion up front because this is, it's almost an emotional issue, right? There are certainly intellectual components here that I know we're going to pull apart, but there is an emotional component when people don't take you at your word, right? There's some frustration. So I'll leave it there and say hello to the listeners and hand it back over, but I am looking forward to this show.
Thank you, Andrew. And before I introduce our guest, there's just a couple of points of business that I want to get out the way. You should already know that Andrew and I did Alpha Online over the beginning of lockdown. We've each completed our courses, but we haven't completed our review yet. We're about halfway through our Alpha review. I had hoped to be able to do 2 Alpha review recordings next week, but it looks like at least one of those is scrubbed because of other things coming on. So we've got quite a busy October recording some really great episodes certainly for Still Unbelievable. I'm hoping I'm going to be able to drop a couple of them onto Proscenium, but we're just going to see how that goes. And on top of that, there is a new online course going by a group called Genexus. They're a UK organisation. They've got a UK website, and they're doing 7 weeks of online seminars, discussions on Christianity, on reasons for Christianity, on what they consider the evidence is for Christianity and the philosophical arguments for Christianity. The first of those 7 was Monday just gone. And so the next 7 is going to take us very close to December. So that's going to be the next few Mondays done. We're going to be reviewing those again the same way as we are reviewing Alpha. And Darren is on that course, so you'll hear more of Darren's voice as well. What Darren and I did on Monday is immediately after the session, we jumped straight onto Skype and we did 20 minutes reviewing what we've just done. So our review course episodes for this are going to be slightly different. They're going to be very live-ish, and they're going to be recorded straight after the session, and I'm going to mix them up there. So it's going to be a slightly different feel, slightly different format for our review courses for the Genexus course, but it's going to be happening there. And I've already reached out to the people at Genexus, and I'm hoping I'm going to be able to have one of the people from that organisation on as an episode as well. I'm really looking forward to that one, understand the reasonings and the motivations behind Genexus. Also, a name that our listeners will know, that of Justin Brierley from the Unbelievable podcast. I believe he is actually going to be presenting this coming Monday's Genexus lecture. So I'm actually looking forward to that, hearing what he says. And talking of Justin has also been a guest on friend of this show, the people over at When Belief Dies. So Justin has recorded an episode with them, and I believe that's going to be coming out next week. It might take a little bit longer for Sam to edit that. So if you're a fan of Justin, or you like to hear Justin talk, or you want to hear a bit about Justin's experience being interviewed on an atheist podcast, go over to that feed next week. I think those were all things. Oh, and one other thing, if you're a subscriber to the Mindshift podcast, I was a guest over on Clint Haycock's podcast. I think the episode that we recorded dropped this week. So if you're a fan of Clint's podcast, go over there if you're not bored of my voice already. And I think that sums up all of the announcements that I had. So friend of the show, returning guest, it is genuinely a great pleasure to have you back on, David, the Graceful Atheist.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me back on.
It's genuinely good to have on. You are always somebody who's going to be welcome, and I'm really glad that we're able to do this show together.
Yeah, thank you.
So remind our listeners.
Say amen. Is that wrong if I say amen?
Or oh boy, maybe we can have oh boy as the So David, remind our listeners who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. So I'm the host of a podcast called the Graceful Atheist Podcast. And the elevator pitch for that is it focuses on deconversion stories, just kind of regular everyday people who had a life-changing, life-altering faith and subsequently lost it as they tell their stories. It is also about something that I call secular grace, which is really just humanism under the hood, but it's a kind of an ethical push for proactively loving each other. And then we also do something called what I like to call an honesty contest. I'm often a bit critical of the debate culture that exists out there. And I really think that having honesty contests with people with whom we disagree is a way to get through, communicate those disagreements and then attempt possibly to find some common ground. So I've been encouraged to do just a bit of name dropping, so I'll do that. I have had some of my intellectual and humanist heroes on the show. Jennifer Michael Hecht, who wrote the book Doubt, A History. Sasha Sagan, who wrote Small Creatures Such as We. I've had Bart Campolo on recently. And then I've had people that I don't agree with. People like Randall Rouser is the most recent episode that is out. And so those are some of the kinds of conversations that I have that are beyond just the topic of deconversion as well.
Excellent. And thank you for that, Dave. I haven't yet listened to your episode with Randall. We are planning to have Randall on as well. What I wanted to do was listen to your episode and take some notes. And I know he's also been speaking with our other friend Dave over on Skeptics and Seekers, and I've still not listened to that episode either. And I want to take notes on that one. So I want to end up being at the back of the line, so I'm armed with all of the ammo so that I can have a better episode than everybody else.
Yes.
Just to be modest there, because I'm the English guy, I need to be modest about it. I do want to say something about your podcast, David, and feel free to shoot me for saying this on recording rather than in private, but it always makes me chuckle. You have this line that you say right at the tail end of your podcast. Can you remember what it is?
Oh, yeah. I say, my name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings.
You also say something else about find somebody you love. Can you remember what it is that you say?
Yeah. Oh, that's way at the end. Yes. Yeah. Something to the effect of grab them, hug them, tell them you love them. Something like that.
Yes. You say find somebody you love and tell them how much they mean to you. That's the phrase that you say.
Yes.
But I think it's something to do with our different accents, because every time I hear it, the words that my mind tells me that you've said, and I know you've not said this, but this is what my brain tells me you've said. It says, find someone you love and tell them how much they need you.
Yes. That is a different connotation.
Which is completely the opposite of what you said.
Yes,
but for some reason, it's clearly your poisoned non-British accent that causes the confusion in my mind. But don't go rushing away re-recording it just because some English dude said something nasty about it. So it gives me a chuckle every time I listen to the end of your podcast.
Okay. That footnote section is over a year old. I've been meaning to re-record it, and now I have my excuse.
And it's going to be done for the next episode as well. But at least off the back of this, at least one person is now going to listen to the entirety of your next episode.
Right. Yes.
So with the pleasantries out the way, the reason why we're here together is we want to talk about what Christians say about those of us who are no longer Christians, or, as I said at the top, deconstructing a deconstruction. And the reason why we've ended up here is we've exchanged quite a few emails between us over the last couple of months expressing various forms of disappointment in the words that we've said that other Christians have said. So who wants to go first and to just express some thoughts on this?
I think I have the perfect quote that's short and succinct and gets us moving. And that was Brian Houston of Hillsong, the pastor at Hillsong, recently tweeted, "When someone can just walk away from their faith, I would question the strength and validity of their faith in the first place." To which John Steingard, who is one of the more recent high-profile deconverts, responded with, "Or you could just love them." Which
Yes, I
thought
saw
was
that
just
response.
beautifully done. And I think that sets the tone for what we probably want to talk about today.
I want to just one paragraph on this idea of how strong some of us former Christians' faith was. I spent 5 years studying the Bible formally. I was a theology student. During that time, I was at church every time the doors opened. And let me tell you that doors at churches open much more frequently than Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. I was a youth leader. I led from the pulpit. And if you can hear that and then say, okay, fine, but you did all of those things and you still had a weak faith, I think all I have to say to that is you're not listening honestly, and you've let yourself out of the Congress of ideas by not being able to hear someone else's story and give them credit for their own viewpoint. If you have a viewpoint that is so important to you that you can't allow someone else to self-testify, that should be a warning sign that you're too caught up either in your own head or the doctrine that you've been taught. But at a very minimum, we all have the same right to self-testify. And we could turn that on its head and just say, the only reason you're suggesting that I had a weak faith is because you are scared you might too. And whoever we said that to would object. Oh no, my faith is very strong. And we would either have to accept that self-testimony or not. And the question is then just simply, what puts us in a better place to have good conversations?
That's absolutely right. And the thing that I really want to emphasize is the whole listening and the loving element. That quote from John Steingard, I saw that David read out. I saw that. I like that on Twitter. It's exactly the way it needs to be. I think what we probably need to do is we need to hit the most common thing that we hear as former Christians, and the thing that we see so often said about other people who are former Christians. It's been said about John Steingard. It's been said about Rhett and Link. It's been said about Joshua Harris. It's been said about all of the others. And it's been said so much we could probably say to in unison together, they were never true believers to start with. And it's really difficult to respond with grace to that kind of thing. And I remember when I was first venturing online and engaging with Christians as somebody who was not an atheist, I knew that sooner or later this thing would be said about me. I just didn't realize how soon that would be and how vociferous it would be and how unrelenting it would be. And I thought I was prepared for that to happen, and I wasn't anywhere near enough prepared for that to happen. And then my next mistake was thinking that all I needed to do was respond with patience and calmness and explain to them that certainly can't be true of me, because I did have a genuine faith. I did strongly believe. None of the people around me at any point ever suggested that maybe I need to check in with the Almighty on the status of my salvation, and that I could show for many, many reasons why my faith was a genuine faith. And every single thing that I said was utterly dismissed because Bible verse. Right. And it was really disheartening to have that conversation, and then to have it again, and then to have it again, and then to have it again many, many more times. And my path through deconversion is mirrored by my path through my responses to those comments, because at first it was patience will get me through, and then it was, well, screw them, I'm just going to reply back in the same way, and that didn't work. And then it became my big red button, and so every time it came up, I went full on rage, and I let them have every single thing of fucking ballistics that I could possibly dish out to them.
Yes.
And I did, and I did, and I did that again and again and again. And that just helped them. And then I had to have these conversations again, where I literally did let out both barrels of rage onto every time I got that comment. And it helped me for a bit, because it really was a red hot button for me for probably almost 2 years. And now I'm past all that, and I'm very zen about that. And my standard response is just to explain to anybody who says that to me directly that, okay, fair enough, but your God did nothing about it. Your God let me believe I was saved. Your God watched me struggle and did nothing about it. Your God was silent when I begged for a solution, and your God still stood there and watched me walk away. If I don't have a faith now, and if I was never saved, fine, it's not my fault. Your God did it. And that is how I respond now. And there's no rage and there's no anger, and I just live in acceptance that some Christians really are fucking stupid.
See, no, I'm not certain that I think that they're stupid. I'm reflecting back on probably
You're
my
right.
second or
I needed another adjective in there.
I'm reflecting back on a conversation I think I had in my second or third episode with Reverend David Helliston, and I was trying to express to him what an odd position that we get placed in as deconverts, having to defend our former faith.
Yes.
Like, that isn't the thing we want to talk about. That isn't the thing that is important. But it feels like you can't even get onto step 0 if they are invalidating your prior faith to begin with.
I want to take that one more step and talk about what it means to be converted to Christianity. So we have books and books of conversion stories, right? Christians tell these stories at tent meetings, and practically anywhere you find a group of Christians, somebody's telling a conversion story, right? But if the conversion story is to mean anything, it means that you're being converted from something. And we should always ask what that something is. My young daughter, she has no belief about religion, right? Were she to develop such a thing, she would have to be taught what religion to believe in. Judaism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever, right? And that idea that we come from something to Christianity should make our deconversion stories equally credible. And here's why. Converting to Christianity must itself have some sort of credibility. And for it to have credibility, the thing that you are converting from, whether you're converting from a life without God to begin with, or from Islam to Christianity or whatever, that original conversion has to have some meaning. And for it to have meaning, the thing that you're coming from has to have some foundation. Likewise, leaving Christianity must have some foundation, at least in my view.
Interesting they should say that. I don't take that view. What I see about Christianity is it's like somebody who, I was going to say, believes moon landings are faked. Let's go with that one just for the sake of arguments. You can ditch that belief and not necessarily replace it with anything. What you're doing is just no longer adhering to something that's blatantly false. So you ditch it.
Hey, can I jump off on that for just a
second?
On, go for it. Sorry to interrupt your thought,
Please.
But I think this is really, really important because it fits in with what we're talking about. What I see so often from apologists or Christians who are being derogatory about deconverts is that they attack the new deconverts' ability or lack of ability to justify some string of positions. morality comes to mind immediately. But I think what you've just said, Matthew, is really, really important, that you can remove or reject a worldview or a way of thinking before you really have a full foundation or full, complete philosophical treaty on where you land, right? So I think as deconverts, we have this experience of suddenly, or not suddenly, but recognizing that we no longer believe in the Christian worldview. And it may take months or years before we have a coherent explanation for where morality, meaning, what have you, comes from. So I think it's very fair to say in both directions that it's acceptable to reject something before you really know what you're replacing it with.
Yeah, that's sort of a misunderstanding of what I said, though. I'm not suggesting that every deconvert suddenly has some new framework to replace Christianity. If you leave Christianity and maybe you're a new humanist, maybe you're not, maybe you've joined Islam. I'm not suggesting that the new convert has some fully integrated worldview in the same way that I'm not necessarily saying that every Christian has a fully integrated worldview that they're leaving. What I am saying is that there is validity in leaving and that person has a right to self-testify about whatever the reason is that they left, whether the Christian finds that it's a fully integrated worldview or not. And the reason for that is that everyone that got to Christianity got there somehow. And if you can get to Christianity in some rational way, it would seem to be that you should be given the same grace, Dave, to suggest that you left Christianity for rational reasons, whatever they are.
Right. No, I completely agree with that part. Yeah.
Picking up on that point, though, is I think what both of you have expressed is probably the reason why many deconverts, and I include myself in this, the whole deconstruction process takes an awfully long time and is emotionally rather draining and painful. For me, it was 3 years, and it was really quite uncomfortable throughout pretty much most of it. And I think it goes to explain why the deconstruction process is so drawn out, and it creates all sorts of issues while people try to adjust their perspectives on life and the universe and everything. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to shift a bit, because we've exchanged a few links between us, and some of these links have been YouTube videos. And I'd like to pull out some of the things that have been said both on blogs and in comments and videos. We can talk around what is being said in these and how it fits with the kind of conversation that we've just been having. The first one I'd like to pull out is called Autopsy of a Deconstruction. And this is about John Steingard. And this is over on the Unbelievable Pathos blog. And in fact, there's a bit of a history to this blog post, which I think tells us a little bit about the person who wrote it. This blog post was originally called A Deconstruction of a Deconstruction, which gives you a little bit of hint where I got the title of this episode from. And it's by a gentleman called Eric Strandness. And when this blog post was first put out, it had comments section on it, and there was 2 comments on this blog post. And then it disappeared for a day, and then it came back with a new title and slightly edited and comments disabled. I always get suspicious where there's a piece like this where there are comments disabled, because it tells me that the people who are managing it have an idea of the kind of criticism it's going to get and where that criticism is going to come from, and they don't really want to receive it. And so,
gentlemen, I have got to go. Matthew,
okay.
I'm sorry.
I am sorry, Andrew.
Me too. Dave, thank you as always for joining us. I'm looking forward to the next time we get to share a full episode.
Absolutely.
You two, thank you sincerely. I will catch up with both of you very shortly.
All right. I do apologize, Andrew. Stay safe, and we'll catch up again another time.
Hey, Andrew,
okay, fellas,
give that baby a hug and tell her how much she needs you.
But to be true to your ending, I should tell her how much she needs you, right? Actually, I'm not sure that works quite that way. But look, guys, I do appreciate you both. And Dave, I am looking forward to the next time we get to share a mic.
Absolutely, man.
All right. Cheers.
All right, fellas, thank you.
Cheers. That's what happens when you buy an iPhone, isn't it? The battery just can't cope anymore. Right. So Andrew just didn't want to hear my punchline, did he? So this blog post over on Unbelievable, this is a bit, and David, you pulled out this paragraph when we were communicating by email. This paragraph is not actually going to be a shock to you, but let's talk about it anyway, and we're going to have more comments along this kind of line. The paragraph here says, one of the things that I have been most struck by in the unbelievable episodes that have chronicled the deconstruction of high-profile Christians is not the power of the forces that toppled their worldview homes, but the poor construction that went into building them. Then he talks a little bit more for a couple of sentences, and then he finishes off with, sadly, our lack of architectural awareness results in an unstable worldview where the roof leaks, the heat periodically gets out, and a fuse blows every time we plug in a new cultural appliance. That and the bit that I've skipped with a few sentences in the middle is all quite elegantly written. He was probably very proud of the effort that went into that. There's some really good, there's a reference to postmodernism in the bit that I didn't read out, etc. It's quite cleverly written.
Yes.
But utterly, it's garbage, really, isn't it?
Yeah. So we both, I think, pulled out that paragraph. I want to talk about two things. One, that specific argument, and then Eric Strandness himself. So first, that specific argument. I've seen this in a number of cases where people are actually trying to study deconversion. And what they focus on is basically, I don't want to say attacking, but disparaging the faith, the way that that person came to faith or the home life that they lived in, and whether they focused not enough on apologetics or too much on apologetics. There's no way to thread the needle to make the apologists happy. And so they attack the way that someone's faith was constructed. And that seems to be, this quote seems to be indicative of that. Well, you know, my response is, you know, what about your growing up? What about your particular faith? You know, how do you know that you won't at some point in time in the future lose your faith? And then my second point that I want to make is about Eric Strandness himself, because I think I read, I know, let me step back. I know that you and Andrew are big fans of the Unbelievable podcast and what Justin is doing there. And I would say that I have a love-hate relationship. I enjoy a good debate, but they also drive me absolutely crazy. And it feels to me that in many ways, it repeats the same set of conversations over and over and over again. So that part of it, I hate. But I will say this. I think Justin Brierley himself does a really good job, a decent job of providing a somewhat fair environment for secularists, humanists, atheists to come on and express their opinions. So I think he does a really good job there. I want, just in case Justin happens to be listening, I want Justin you to know that you are doing yourself and the Unbelievable brand disservice by having Eric write for you. It took me maybe 3 different blog posts on the Unbelievable Pathos site to realize that my visceral reaction to these blog posts of being so bad turned out to be the same person. Now, I don't know Eric. I don't know him at all. His little bio says that he's a doctor, that he's written 3 books on apologetics, but he is doing the worst of straw man setups and then tearing down those straw man. It is antithetical to the spirit and ethos of what I think the Unbelievable podcast is about. And I really honestly think he's doing damage to that brand.
It's very interesting to hear you say that, Dave, because I feel exactly the same way. And although I haven't done it yet, for the last week or so, I've actually been emailing Justin to say exactly what you've just said. He is damaging Justin's Unbelievable brand, and Justin has built up a very good brand there, a very amiable brand there, and a brand that seeks to try to have a reaching across the boundary and of people coming in from different views and from different opinions and having a conversation that both sides want to listen to. And Eric is undoing that in the style of the posts that he's written. And this one that I've just read a quote from isn't the only one. It's just, in my opinion, the worst one. But there are others which are just as bad, and they are guilty of all the things that you have just said. And it is tarnishing what I think is a well-polished brand that Justin's got. And I really hope that he's not going to become the new international face of Unbelievable, because it's not deserving of him. Right. Or he's not deserving of it, rather.
Yeah. I think we could. I've got a couple more quotes that I'd like to just throw out there, because I came in hot there, and I want to justify why I think this is so bad. So just a couple more from the article you're referring to. This is Eric speaking. I think that many an atheist subconsciously wants God to exist so that they can vent their anger on an imaginary deity every time evolution gets a little too rough with the unfit. It is a form of divine primal scream therapy that temporarily assuages their nihilistic anxiety. So, sure,
it's like he threw a dictionary into a blender, isn't it?
Yeah, and every stereotypical trope about atheists. This is just I can't even really address it. But just one more quote. We can't just ridicule the rickety worldview they have cobbled together, because when we do, we deny the deep emotional investment they have already put into such a massive undertaking. We can't just callously condemn it, string caution tape around it, and leave them homeless. And this goes back to what your first quote. He's disparaging the deconvert for being honest. And I say this on my podcast a lot when a guest of mine says a particularly brutally self-aware, brutally self-honest thing that I know can be used against them. And I'll say, I'm going to be defensive for you. That honesty is, the truth will set you free. That honesty is what is so important. And even if the apologist class uses it against you, that is truth. And that is the thing that will lead you to the truth, however you discover it, right? And I think that they are attacking that process.
Yes. And there's an interesting irony going on here as well, because it's not, but if the atheist worldview, which it isn't, is really so rickety and leaky, why are so many Christians leaving that well-built, solid house of Christianity and coming over to live and dwell in the shack with us? Why are so many doing it? If it's so bad, if it's so unattractive, if it's so appalling, if it does such a terrible job of explaining the realities of the world, why are so many people coming away from Christianity and joining us over here by the campfire? It doesn't say a lot for what Christianity really is if what we've got is attracting them.
Absolutely.
Just to say.
Yeah. And I think occasionally you will have an apologist who will be honest and acknowledge the great sacrifice that someone who deconverts has to make, right? They are losing potentially family, friends, community. They are giving up quite a lot to come out and say, I no longer believe. In particular, we've discussed and we'll continue to discuss the high profile ones. So John Steingard, that is the subject of this particular article. He's throwing away a music career. You know what I mean? That is a huge sacrifice. So what I want, if you're a believer and you're listening, if you're an apologist and you're listening, what I want you to ask yourself is, instead of trying to disparage that person, ask yourself, what would lead a person to let go of all of those things, be willing to risk losing relationships with family and friends, being willing to let go of community, potentially giving up, in these famous examples, a lucrative career. And yet, in order for them to have integrity, in order for them to be intellectually honest, they do come out and say they no longer believe. What would push someone to do that? And answer that question for yourself.
Yeah, I think on one of the YouTube videos, I think it was even Braxton Hunter himself who said he acknowledged that very real point, that some of these people, high profile people who are deconverting, it's not just an emotional cost that they're suffering when they do it. Very often it is a financial cost and a welfare cost and a livelihood cost, because they have dependents. And people don't do that kind of thing lightly. They don't do it for the hell of it, and they certainly don't do it just so that they can sin, which
Right.
is the other thing that we hear quite a lot.
Yes.
But I think a straightforward question I'd like to ask you is, how many Christians do you think actually appreciate how hard it is to deconstruct?
Oh, I don't think many. I think that's part of the deconversion stories, is that the believer, while they're in the believing phase, themselves are discovering, as they are deconstructing one piece at a time, how painful that process is. I think if you asked them, did you know what it was going to cost you early on? I imagine most of them would say no. So my gut instinct is that the average believer who has not deconstructed at all has no idea what it costs.
I think you're right, and I absolutely agree with you. The only people that I've heard acknowledge that, and there aren't many of them, are people who have engaged in dialogue with us Xers on several occasions. So they've heard the message often enough that it's sunk in. But people who aren't engaging with integrity in that conversation, I don't think they get it. I don't think they get it at all.
Yeah. And you make a really good point there. I think one of the things I've been surprised by is the lack of curiosity by believers in general, but faith leaders, apologists specifically. My show, your shows, both of them, are very amenable. We are open to having conversations with people that are nice. We're not trying to attack people. And there's just an utter lack of curiosity. People do not engage with us to say, for their own new knowledge, what was it that led you to lose your faith? I so rarely get asked that question by a believer, and it amazes me. And I think, particularly pastors, right? Pastors, you have a duty to shepherd your flock, to lead them through doubt. We have an invaluable perspective on that we can share with you in a non-aggressive way. If you would just spend time talking with us instead of attacking our justifications or lack thereof.
Yes, there's a chilling silence when it comes to the curiosity of Christians for deconstruction experiences. And I'm not going to try and predict why that is, because if I try to guess why that is, I'm making exactly the same error that I was berating Christians for on trying to tell me why I deconstructed. But I would like to know, I would like to ask some Christians, and if you're a Christian listening to this, maybe you could make a suggestion to us, email in, or email Dave even at his own channel, and let us know, because I genuinely would like to know why more Christians are not asking that question. I don't know I know that your wife is still a Christian, David, but I don't know what your social life is like. My wife is also still a Christian, as is my teenage daughter. And we have a social circle. Obviously, it's a bit dampened now because of the current worldwide situation that we find ourselves in. But to give you an example of what our social circle is like, about a year ago this week, for a belated celebration of a birthday that I had last year, we had friends round for a fun themed dinner. Everybody dressed up, and we had a murder mystery going on, and it was gloriously great fun. But I was the only atheist at the table. Two of the guests that we had were active church ministers, and the third of our guests was a retired church minister. And everybody else, the partners of those people, were clearly Christians. And that is the social circle that I'm in. And one of them I've had an extended conversation with about my atheism, because he was the pastor of this church that my wife currently goes to. And so when we moved to this area, we had to have the conversation about joining the church membership, etc. And I had to say straight up, I can't be a member of your church because I don't believe. So we had a conversation around that. Yeah. But since that day, almost 8 years ago, I've had no repeat of that conversation with any of those people who are people that I class as friends. So if I'm not even having that conversation with people who are my friends, people who I trust emotionally, people who I knew that if my life was on the line and I was in urgent need, who I knew I could ring and get help if I really, really needed it. That kind of people. If I can't be having that conversation with those people, then why am I expecting a stranger on the internet to have that conversation with me?
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
So maybe we as atheists need to do something different as well. You know, those of us who are in the situation that I'm in, I have a personal opportunity with people that I know to try to have these conversations, but I don't know how it goes beyond that. But
Right.
I also grant that sometimes actually having these difficult conversations with people that we're not emotionally bonded to is often so much easier because we're not putting a relationship at risk there.
Yeah, I did want to highlight here that I just recently had a conversation with my best friend, actually, and we've been real open with each other. We have a really good dialogue. Again, I'm surprised by some of his lack of curiosity, but I feel very comfortable bringing up the topic. I talk about the podcast. I talk about people I've had on the podcast and the interviews that I get to do with him all the time. But just recently, he finally said, "Hey, remind me where your podcast is. I want to listen to it."
Yeah.
And I believe he's listened to a couple of episodes, and in particular, one with Dr. Anthony Pinn about race, our current moment in history. And I think that had an impact on him. I'll be curious to our next conversation. About every month we have, just a hang out and chat. So I'll be curious to hear what he has to say. So it can happen. Again, I think my surprise is the lack of regularity. And like you're saying, even when it's out in the open with someone, they often don't bring the subject up themselves ever again.
Yeah. And I think I'll use that opportunity to tell another very personal thing. And this is partly why I don't share habitually the podcast episodes that I put out onto my personal Facebook feed, because my personal Facebook feed is littered with people who are personal to me over the last 30 years. And the vast majority of them are Christians. And I don't do it because I'm embarrassed by it. I don't do it because I don't want to cause distress to those people who I care about. Because I do know that sometimes I do say things on my podcast. I've sworn already quite brutally on this episode. I occasionally swear on Still Unbelievable. We're mostly clean episodes on Still Unbelievable, but sometimes I think the topic deserves some ferocious language.
Yeah.
And so I don't share these episodes habitually onto my personal Facebook because I don't want the Christian friends that I care about to listen to it and be offended by something that I've said about their faith. Because I am very much aware that saying something critical, highly critical of Christianity, the belief, can hurt a Christian very strongly emotionally, sometimes even more so than if you'd actually personally insulted them. I'm aware of that, and so I don't do it because I don't. So I have the Reason Press Facebook group where I post the episodes to there, and if people want to get Facebook notifications of the episodes, that's the place to go. But slightly more extended from that, many years ago, now I'm going back 30 years, I did youth work, and the chap who was the youth work leader that I worked with for many years knew me as an enthusiastic youth worker, and we did do youth work together for a number of years. Then him and his wife emigrated to Australia, I don't know how many years ago now, 15 years ago maybe, and we hadn't been in touch for more than a decade. And then we got back in touch again on Facebook for a couple of years, and I am sometimes quite vocal in other ways on Facebook posts, and I sometimes comment on Christian feeds, sometimes on the Unbelievable podcast feeds on Facebook, and I'll say things. And he and I several times over the years got quite I'm not going to say heated, but we got quite enthusiastic in discussing various things. And I could tell there were times where it was quite perplexing for him because he knew the kind of faith that I had, and I think for him it was a puzzling, difficult time, and we battled these things from different views, but he never once asked me how I'd ended up in a radically different place to when he knew me last. But we just had these conversations of arguing different viewpoints, and I thought we were still good-naturedly people who respected each other. but he would occasionally respond to things I said, and we'd have a little, I say battle, it probably wasn't really a battle. I didn't view it as a battle, but it clearly had an effect on him, because after a couple of months of realizing that we hadn't had one of these for a while, I realized that he'd blocked me on Facebook.
Oh, no. Wow.
So I felt sad by that. I still feel sad thinking about it now, and it was about 3 years ago now when it happened. But clearly his knowing that I had these views caused him some small amount of distress. I'm guessing here. I may be wrong, and unfortunately I can't have that conversation with him because I have no other way of contacting him.
Right.
But clearly there was a negative response in him to the kind of either the conversations that we were having on Facebook or the things that I was saying on Facebook. So maybe there is a lesson for me in that. What do I consider to be of more importance? And you can hear from what I've just said a few minutes earlier that the feelings of the people that I care about do mean something to me, and I am saddened that I clearly had this negative impact on this person that had been a friend 30 years ago. Also, but it does touch in on this unwillingness to engage with the person and the why, because we never engaged with that. He never asked me why this had happened to me or how this had happened to me. And I never felt that I wanted to force that conversation on him. We just talked around characters of God that we were now on opposite sides of the conversation of. So I don't know how to change that. And so all I know is is to do what I keep on doing, is keep having these conversations as best I can, and to criticize what I think needs criticizing, and be gracious and open when I can be open. And that's partly why I did the Alpha course, and partly why I'm doing this Genexus course, because it opens me up to people who are much more reasonable. Because I'm finding these conversations with Christians on Zoom are far more reasonable than the conversations that I have on Facebook. They're far better quality conversations. The unfortunate side effect is they're just not long enough. But I'm hoping that those Christians will see a better side of me, a side that's not just text.
I just wanted to respond really quick. So several things that you say that are, I just think, really important. One, I have the pseudonym, the Graceful Atheists, and I actually don't mix my personal accounts for this reason. My personal Facebook is chock full of very, very conservative politically and theologically people from my hometown, none of whom would understand in any way where I'm at. And I'm acutely aware that, depending on what your entry point is to my work, it may come across as the angry atheist kind of thing. And there are so many barriers for the believer to dismiss you, to say, well, they're just hostile, they're angry at God, what have you, and then never actually engaged with the depth of my work, which is really about loving people and, in fact, building bridges to believers. That's actually the brunt of the message that I have. But the point I want to make is I'm acutely aware that, if you read this blog post or this tweet or, the beginning of this podcast or what have you, you can have a completely incomplete picture of what I'm all about. And I imagine that's the same there. And then the second point I want to make is that I'm very critical of social media and specifically text-based. So I'm on Twitter constantly. So don't get me wrong. I'm very, very guilty of this. I'm not saying that. But the problem is in text, all nuance, all human communication mechanisms are reduced to their barest form. It is so easy to take someone the wrong way in a way that they didn't intend. It just so happens that my work, we do a tremendous amount of communication over text in a very, very old protocol called IRC.
Oh my word.
Yeah. And the reason I bring this up is you learn very quickly to be as explicit as possible, to express as vociferously and verbosely as possible so that you are well understood. And because it is so easy to miss that. And I think the problem with social media is you have people who don't have that experience. They are unaware that they are going to be misunderstood. and they say things in the starkest, barest form. And I see this constantly, even between well-meaning people, believers and non-believers, trying to have a conversation on Twitter, and 2 posts in, it becomes a flame war, right? It may have started with the best of intentions, but it just devolves so quickly. And so this was a long-winded way to say what you've tapped into here is really important, that just having the Zoom call, being able to see the person, being able to see their facial expressions, to be able to feel the emotion that they are emoting as they say the words, is so critical to communication. And you have to be very aware of what you are losing when you are on any form of a text-based communication platform.
Yes. I nearly did Andrew's joke and said amen to that.
Yeah, yes. Sorry, I can occasionally get up on a high horse. So
absolutely. You stay up there, dude. You stay up there. I'd like to change tack just a little bit here.
Absolutely.
So one of the YouTube videos that you sent me in a link was with Capturing Christianity, and had Braxton Hunter on it and Mike Lacona on it. Yes. And quite early on, this is the only bit direct from the video that I've commented on, because a lot of that video was them telling their own personal stories, and that just didn't feel relevant to the conversation that we were having. But they were talking a little bit about Rhett and Link's public deconstruction. So it's a YouTube video that's quite a few months old. But there is something that Braxton said, and I'm paraphrasing here. These are not his exact words, but this is pretty much the gist of what he said. And I'd like to know how you feel about this sentence, David. When public people do public deconstructions, it does more damage than atheist YouTube channels.
Yes, it's interesting, Matthew, because I was prepping for this and I rewatched the beginning of that as well. I actually have the exact quote.
Do you? Oh, awesome.
Written down.
Let's our users have the exact quote.
Yeah, and we'll have the links in the show notes, I'm assuming. Around the 6-ish minute mark, give or take, Braxton says, when they, and he was referring specifically to Link and Rhett's deconversion, come out and tell us this very emotional story, this very personal story that seems to be very genuine story about their process, I think it has more of a severe impact on a larger number of people than a lot of those atheist YouTube channels combined. And
so I threw in the word damage there. He didn't actually say damage, so that was my
Well, one or both of us could have gotten a word wrong here. Please go, listeners, go actually listen to.
I'm sure you're right, because you actually listened to it again and wrote it down.
But I thought this was a really telling and unintentionally deeply honest statement, in that this is part of the reason why apologists can't take deconverts at their word, or as you were talking about earlier, Andrew was talking about earlier, when we tell our own stories, obviously we have the best insight into that. Just accepting that obvious fact. It's because the impact on Christianity is so severe. It's so damaging. And somebody like John Steingard, somebody like Rhett and Link, with these very high profile media careers, when they come out and they are sensible, they're honest, they are graceful, and they say, I've lost my faith and I'm working through this, that has just this huge, huge impact. And you really can't argue against that, right? And their only defense is to attack the person, to ad hominem attack the person.
Yes, and I think it is very telling, these public ones, because I think the key thing, in my opinion, is what it does. It gives the normal people permission to doubt too, and to doubt more seriously. Because I remember being a young Christian in church and hearing phrases such as, true, honest, genuine doubt leads to stronger, greater faith. Don't fear your doubt. Just don't fall away. But it wasn't really a call to embrace doubt, but it was a be okay with doubt, but let it lead you back to faith. When you're a Christian, you hear these big stories here of, well, doubt didn't rescue a deeper faith. I think it gives them permission to be a little bit more probing in their own doubts, and they want to go, oh, this person that I knew, this person that I looked up to, and they'll go and read their story, and they're going to pick apart the comments. And I think, and again, this is just me whistling into the wind here, but I think when somebody who is what I used to call a fringe Christian when I was a genuine Christian, when those people who are on the edge and are good farming ground for doubt, when they see something like what Rhett and Link did and what John Steingard is doing, and they read their stories in their blogs in their own words and hear them talking in their own words, and then they go and read blog posts like the one that we've criticized from Eric earlier. Mm-hmm. And they compare and contrast the different language and the different words that are being used. They see that actually the deconvert is coming out as the nicer, better person.
Right.
And I think that is highly, highly attractive. And I think my feeling genuinely is that is why these people are having more of an impact than atheist YouTubers, because sometimes, let's be honest, atheist YouTubers can be just as unpleasant as Christian YouTubers.
Oh, yes, very much so. Can I say amen? Yes.
There's going to be a lot of
very
those.
much so, yes.
And I'm going to put my own hand up. I can be very sharp and very cutting on social media, both on Facebook and on Twitter and on the same podcast. I am far less graceful than my gracious guest is here quite often in my conversation. That's possibly why I lost that friend that I talked about earlier. But when you get people like John Steingard out and he's very gracious and he's very open and he's being on quite a lot of Christian podcasts talking it through, and you get people like Rhett and Link who are clearly very popular, though I'll be honest, I don't think I've ever watched their YouTube channel, but they're clearly well respected, very popular. They did this very gracious, and I did read the post that they did, and I thought it was a lovely post. And again, it was very honest, very decent, very heartfelt, very polite, very personable, and very attractive. And then you go and read what other Christians are saying about them, and it's dripping with sarcasm. Yeah. It's dripping with just writing off and interpretation of what they said, calling their house a shack and all this kind of thing. And you go, why would I want to follow that person? And I think that's where the damage is. So I'd actually like to go back to this quote that we've just pulled out from Braxton. So yes, that was a very gracious and generous quote that Braxton made. But actually, I don't think it's those public deconstructions that are having the impact, personally. I think it's the sharp-minded, insincere comments from the Christian apologists who are deconstructing those deconstructions, who are actually doing the damage.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I do want to expand on that and just say, in fact, in my most recent podcast with Randall Rouser, I make the argument in the final thoughts area that I think apologetics itself as a field, as a thing, is doing more damage to Christianity than anything atheists are doing. And the reason is that, and I've said this before, people will be bored of hearing me say it, but while I was a believer and I would occasionally consume apologetics, the thing that bothered me, and I don't know that I could have put it in words at the time, but what I now recognize is that I was convinced of the conclusions by faith, right? I believed in the resurrection. I believed that God was real and a part of my life in a very visceral, interactive way. But I could see the flaws in the arguments. The arguments are bad, and I don't know how to say it any other way. I think that there are times where we are trying to be, and I appreciate that this is the Graceful Atheist saying this, we are trying to steelman the theists' apologetic arguments, and we're bending over backwards to be nice to them. But the problem is the arguments are in many ways not even wrong. We haven't even begun to get to an epistemology that we can all agree on that could get to where they're at. And I want to give just one more example. Several months ago, you had me on this podcast, and we talked about another unbelievable podcast episode where the discussion was about evolution and does that map to Genesis 1 and 2. I actually had the apologist, Neve, contact me, and we were going to do a podcast together. And I read her book, and I realized, I read the whole book, but I realized about 4 chapters in, I can't do this conversation. And the reason is that Neve wanted to make this argument about the fall of humanity way down the road. But I couldn't get to step 0, right? We couldn't, I disagreed with her in the first paragraphs of her book. And so it would be a disservice for me to have her on and have to go, okay, I disagree with you here and I disagree with you here and I disagree, you know what I mean? It would just be me saying, you're wrong 150 times as she tried to express it. Now, I want to be super clear. I'm not picking on Neve in particular. I think this is true of many, many apologists. They want to focus on the conclusion. And what we have identified as deconverts often is that the arguments are the things that are bad. The arguments are flawed, deeply flawed, fatally flawed in some way or another. And often that can be obfuscated in some deeply sophisticated way. I'm really frustrated with all of the variations on Bayes' theorem. I look at these articles and they look like technical white papers and they throw this math around. And at the bottom end, they are still begging the question. They are still inserting the conclusion into the premise. And it just drives me up the wall. And I even see atheists who are trying to steelman the theist's arguments here, or the apologist arguments here, doing the exact same thing. And it just drives me nuts that the argumentation, the form of the argument itself is broken. If you can insert your conclusion into the premise, we're done here. There is no more to talk about, right? And I feel like there's some line in the sand that we need to take that says we have to agree on some set of facts to even start the conversation. I'm amenable to debating what that set of facts is, but we can't begin with your conclusion. No. All right. And to be fair, I appreciate you can't begin with my conclusion that there is no God. I appreciate that. But we do have to at least agree on something. Yes. And I find so many conversations that I see on YouTube, on podcasts, on social media where they haven't done that groundwork, and it's competing presuppositions that are unstated. And that is the worst kind of conversation or debate, because you don't even know why you're disagreeing.
Yes, quite.
Right. Like
Absolutely.
It's abundantly clear to me where things went off the rails because you both came from two different presuppositions, but you never acknowledged that.
Yes, quite. I've had several aborted conversations where it went, and again, I'm cutting what was a long conversation quite short for the benefit of this, but it was basically, how can you as an atheist explain all the facts about the crucifixion and the resurrection that are reported in the gospel? And I said, like what? And so they reel off the women at the tomb and Jesus rising and all that. I said, hold on. You're asking me to explain facts which we haven't even established are facts. So let's first of all work out which bits of that story are actually believable before you start asking me to explain bits which I don't even accept happens.
Right. I completely agree with you. And it's interesting that I just had this conversation with Randall. In my attempt to steelman his argument, I pointed out that even if we grant all the facts, the non-supernatural facts, so just things like Jesus was a teacher, he was crucified, he was buried, and pertinent details that lead up to that, other than the miracles. Even granting all of that, it gets you nowhere near proving the resurrection. I mean, not even close. And again, your point that we have to agree on some set of facts, like, for example, how you interpret history, how you interpret miraculous claims in historical documents, to even begin that conversation. And because we disagree on that, we're of course going to come on to different conclusions. Yeah.
I'd like to move on a bit, and I'd like to read out a comment that came from one of those YouTube videos, the same one that we were just discussing, that we pulled out the comments from Braxton on. And this is a comment clearly from a Christian, but it's the other major thing that gets pointed out at Christians. So we've already pointed out the thing about you were never really a believer in the first place. This comment touches on probably the second most common thing that gets pointed our way. And this comment goes like this: question authority. I love you guys. Folks fall away when they want an excuse to sin. Pride, intellectual pride, pride of all kinds is a primal sin against the truth. Human beings are not equal with God, and man ate the fruit to gain knowledge of good and evil. We are not innocent. So, how do we respond to that one, David?
Yeah. So first of all, I like to say, to people, I am the most boring human being you've ever met. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I cuss very rarely. I find this one comical, right? Like my morality just barely changed. What changed was I was able to embrace loving everyone without hesitation. I actually feel like I am a more loving person now because I don't have the constraints that I felt prior to deconversion. So that's one element. The other element that I hear a lot that's just a parallel to what you've just described is that we are incapable of morality. Or they'll say, you are capable of morality, but that's because you're built in the image of God. Or they'll say, and I think our good friend Eric Strandness said this as well, you can have a morality, but it's based on God's goodness, and you can't justify your own morality. These are all variations on the same thing. I like to push back and push it further and say, not only am I saying that my morality is based on loving people and human flourishing and the various attempts that other humanists have made at describing that, I'm making the claim that they do too, that the Christians themselves have the same basis of morality, and the proof of the pudding of that is slavery is illegal, right? They want desperately for there to be an objective morality. And I want to acknowledge here that there's, millennia of arguments about whether or not morality is objective. But beyond that, I think it's important to acknowledge, even if there were such a thing as an objective morality, it is entirely another thing to say that you know what it is, that you are the spokesperson for that objective morality. And so my pushback to Christians is the far more dangerous thing is to say that you know what the objective morality is and that everyone ought to live up to that. Because not only is it your interpretation of what that objective morality is, you are then saying that everyone should live under that particular standard, which I find deeply, deeply dangerous, right? So the great atrocities in history, both from theists and atheists, have been when a person believes they know what is right for everyone and then enforces that with violence. What is, I think, a much healthier perspective is to say, we don't know. There may or may not be an objective morality, but even if there were one, we don't know what it is. And therefore, we have to work it out together, how we are moral with one another. And I'll make one last point. I know you're dying to talk. I'm sorry for talking so long. I'd like to make just one other point, and that is the distinction between relative and subjective. And I always hear the argument that humanist morality is relative. And I want to lean into that and say, yes, it is. But I want to make the distinction between relative and subjective. They say that as if we are saying that that morality is subjective. Subjective implies that it is just what I think it is. I do what I want to do because I want to do it. That's subjective. Relative is something else entirely. Relative is I have my morality based on the way both that I was treated by my birth family, the way that I was treated by friends and family as I grew up, the way I treat my birth family and my friends and family, the way I treat my chosen family and my kids, the way I treat my friends and neighbors, the way I treat my community, the way I treat the city I live in, the people that live in my city and state and country. And then we have a moral obligation to the citizens of the world as well. All of those things are relative, but that doesn't make them any less binding and important and real. And I think so often the Christian objection to humanist morality is they are conflating subjective with relative. And I'll get off my high horse now.
Yeah, and I think there's such a visceral response against any concept or notion of morality being anything other than objectively put down from God that upsets some Christians. And I
Yes.
don't fully understand why the reaction is so negative, but there's a real visceral response to that suggestion. I am hoping to have an episode on morality, but it's going to be a few weeks before I get round to arranging that. But that's something to look forward to in the run up to Christmas on this show. So stay listening, folks. Back onto the whole thing of sin. I'm going to be straight up honest. And in my deconstruction period, the desire to kill Christianity so that I could have the freedom to do other things. I mean, I don't even know what it was I could get up to. What, steal a pen from work? I mean, really?
Yeah.
It genuinely was not a feature of my thinking at all throughout the whole process. I had been drummed in because of my upbringing, and people who've listened to both your podcast and to mine have heard me tell bits of my story, and I had quite a fundamentalist upbringing in the missionary environment. So I had absolutely been pummeled with this whole thing about people being atheists just want to sin. There's no morality out there. You have to stay with God because that's where your protection is. So my deconstruction did involve me answering the question of how can I be moral? And if I take this road any further and go full on atheist, am I going to overnight turn into a murderer? Am I going to suddenly wake up and go, I need to kill someone? And that thought, that idea did torment me for, I don't know how long it was, but it tormented me for a while because I couldn't process it, because I'd been so indoctrinated with this wrong thinking. It caused me genuine pain. That was probably the darkest part of my whole deconstruction process, because I had a child by then, and I thought, how am I going to be a father with this thing that I adore? How am I going to be able to love myself if I can't respect anybody, and if I can't be the right kind of father for this precious bundle who I look at and my heart just melts? It took me a good while to realize, but the creeping realization came in that actually, you know what, I was going to be okay. Ditching Christianity did mean that some of my things had to be a focus, but this innate desire to go running around doing nasty things of any kind to any and all sorts of creatures, or even to eat babies, that just wasn't there, and it was never going to be there. I was still the same person with the same preferences, the same loves, the same desires, and funnily enough, the same morality. I mean, some things did change, and you said earlier that you think you're a better person. I think I was a better person. I remember that day when I realized that, hang on a minute, there are people that I can be non-judgmental about. Isn't that awesome?
Yes.
And that weight lifting off me, thing, I no longer have to look at those two men holding hands and feel indignant rage silently seething out of my eyes towards them. And it just wasn't there. And it felt wonderful. It absolutely, genuinely felt awesome. And I think it was when I had that kind of epiphany, I thought, you know what? I'm going to be all right, and I'm going to be more than all right. I'm going to be better, and it's going to be awesome, and it's going to be wonderful. And I think then I realized that I was over the hump and life was going to be great. And I probably walked a little bit taller that next day.
I have had so many conversations with people who talk about being a child and recognizing the immoral aspects of Christianity, that it was, a moral problem with what was being presented to them as a kid. And I think if a child can point out the flaws in your moral system, then maybe there's a problem with it. So,
yeah. Right. I don't want to go too long on reading comments because we've probably said more or less what we all want to say. And I think we're probably now in the area where we're going to repeat a lot of what we said. But I think there are still some things that we can unpack. So I'm going to change tack again now. There's a longer comment here that I want to read. And this is a comment, again, on the same YouTube video. I'll promise it will be the last one I read from this particular YouTube video. I don't know how many more we're going to get to. It's slightly longer, and this one is from an atheist. And so it takes a different line on the video. There will be a link to this video. So it goes like this. It sounds like you guys are having a difficult time understanding where Rhett is coming from. Why evolution was such a big deal to him. and why he isn't convinced of the resurrection, even though you guys have such great evidence. I can help with that. Rhett grew up in a community, which accounts for a huge percentage of the population, that denies evolution and ties biblical trustworthiness to this denial. When Rhett finally realized YEC was false, YEC standing for Young Earth Creationism, when YEC finally realized YEC was false, and not just a little bit, but eye-wateringly false, he began to realize that this huge YEC population had effectively deceived itself concerning a very straightforward scientific reality. This is what sours people to religious beliefs. Because if people can deny the hand in front of their face, what else can they deny? So when someone like Rhett comes across the evidence for the resurrection, and it turns out to be what is essentially hearsay, from a time when even historians had far less reliable recording methods than we have today, he realized that's not nearly enough to justify the belief an unprecedented supernatural event like a resurrection. It all starts to look depressingly similar to the same type of shenanigans YEC people do. And that's the beginning of the end. And that tells my story in a nutshell as well. Yeah, it did start from the realization that Young Earth Creationism wasn't just a little bit wrong, wasn't just a best guess about what we had. It was utterly, fundamentally rotten in every single way about it. And you and I have had the conversation about that already on this episode. And I was very brutal about Young Earth Creationism. I called it dangerous. And I still believe that. And it did do to me what this comment says, is it soured me towards religious beliefs in a real tangible way, because I saw the same rottenness that there is in Young Earth Creationism in other areas too.
Yeah. You know, I think something that has been on my mind, because in the United States right now, there is a conspiracy theory called QAnon.
Oh, yes.
You may have read about this, and it is particularly spreading in evangelical churches. And I think this is really, really important, right? Like, again, if you're a pastor and you're listening to this is critical that you hear what we're trying to say here. You cannot say, on the one hand, have critical thinking about something like a conspiracy theory, and then drop that critical thinking when you look at the first 2 chapters of Genesis. You have to have a consistent way of looking and evaluating evidence. And part of the problem, the reason that Christians in particular are susceptible to this type of conspiracy theory, is that they have been trained to accept what the leader says. They've been trained to accept the interpretation of evidence that their pastor or an author or what have you passes down to them uncritically. You will have this problem again and again and again until you can have some intellectual honesty. And I really want to make this point really strong. If you say to me that you believe by faith, I respect that. I don't have a problem with it. I'm not in the business of creating more atheists. That truly and honestly is not what I care about. If you understand that the scientific method is a reasonable and useful way to discover things, and that you have a modicum of critical thinking that you apply in the world, and you believe, I'm totally fine with that. The problem comes when you want not only yourself, but me and everyone else to believe something that is demonstrably untrue or lacks even the remotest level of evidence that is requisite for the claim. That's the problem, and that is what leads to this susceptibility to conspiracy theories.
Yes, and I did notice that in myself, but I didn't notice it until retrospectively looking back. I was so much more susceptible to believing conspiracy theories when I was a full-on Christian, and especially when I was a creationist. And my ability to see them broke away when my Young Earth Creationism started to shatter. But it's really so much better now that I'm not a Christian. I'm not saying that about all Christians. We have conversations about these kinds of things at home. And my daughter is very good at critical thinking and spotting these things. She's come to me several times and she said, my friend has told me this, but this sounds like something that's not very true and is a conspiracy theory. You know, do you agree, Dad? and go, oh, I've never heard that one before. Let's just do a quick check. And go, yep, you're right. Your critical thinking did work there, honey. You did spot it. And I think it's important that we try and have these conversations with honesty with those that we love. And I don't know what it was about my specific brand of Christianity that made me susceptible to it, but I'm so glad that I'm not seeing it in my own household, and I rejoice in that. But I do see it around. It was only this week I was having, and I know it's all my fault. I went onto a Christian Facebook page and they were talking about abortion, and I know I couldn't keep my fingers away. And so I put in about, well, will somebody think about the woman, the vulnerable woman who's there, who's in a terrible place, and you want to criminalize her vulnerability? How dare me as an atheist go on and say such a thing?
Yeah.
But I couldn't believe, and I got the standard thing about pro-death and all that come back, and then I just didn't know how to respond. I actually saw the words in front of me: Satanists have abortions so they can sacrifice the babies to the devil.
Yikes!
And I don't know how to have a serious conversation after a comment like that. And I don't know where it comes from, but it can only come from some kind of religious belief.
Yeah.
So, dear Christians, please think about what it is that you're saying. And if you really do think that that kind of thing is going on, then saying it to me on a Facebook group is not the place to make it public. Go to the police with some evidence and report it, because if people are doing that, they need to be in jail. There are places and there are justice systems for that. So find the evidence and I will help you prosecute them if I can. I will support you with people prosecuting those, because it is wrong to do. But don't make it up to support an anti-abortion agenda. And I think this is a symptom of something within Christianity that helps conspiracies to breed, and it is off-putting. And people who are more prone to questioning conspiracies, if they see you as their fellow Christian really pushing these kinds of things out, you're going to drive them away. Please have more faith in your fellow man. People who are not Christians are decent people too, and please, let's try to separate fact from conspiracy.
To sum up, I mean, there's lots more that we could talk about, obviously, but I do think we would start repeating ourselves. But I just want to sum up and just say, I think that apologetics is hurting even believers. I think it's hurting the church. So from your perspective, apologists, I wish you would hear us. It is making it more difficult for believers to have critical thinking skills. And ultimately, if then their faith is predicated on those arguments can be refuted and are. I hate to break it to you. No matter how sophisticated those arguments are, someone is going to come along and say, here's the fatal flaw in this. So you are doing a disservice to your very own people. And then the primary topic of this conversation has been about deconverts. When you come after the deconvert and attack their person, attack their morality, as Matthew pointed out, that makes you look bad, not the deconvert. You are doing a disservice for your own mission. If you could just hear one thing from us today, it's that. We need to be kind and gracious with one another. And in particular, that deconversion process, and Matthew really hinted at this, is a long, arduous, and often painful process. People are vulnerable during that time. And the last thing they need is somebody to come and tell them the 10 reasons why they're wrong.
Yes, absolutely. And I absolutely echo everything that David just said. And my own take is you really do need to pay attention to what the deconverts are saying. It is the height of disrespect to tell them that they're doing it because they want to sin, or to tell them that they never really believed in the first place. Those are the worst things you can possibly say, because what you're doing is you're devaluing everything that they went through. And worse than that, you're not even taking the time or the bother to actually learn the truth. You're just making up bullshit on the fly and you're throwing it at them. And you wouldn't like it if it was done the other way. So don't do it to them. Have a little bit of decorum. have a little bit of grace, be more like Jesus. If you actually read the New Testament, Jesus spent a lot of time sitting with and talking with unbelievers and learning about their situation and being gracious to them. If you truly believe that Jesus was real and that you follow his example, then follow his example, please. It's a really important thing that to have this conversation. And I do know that there are Christians who are really nervous about having these conversations with former believers, because we are the people that can do damage to the faith of others. We are the people that, if too many Christians listen to us, we can reduce their population. We are often seen as a very real threat to other Christians. I get that, but you don't dissipate that threat by attacking us. And very often we have really good knowledge of the Bible, and we can fight you back with theology, with Bible verses, and with the kind of things that you know. And we've got the advantage of critical thinking and science on our side as well. So please try to engage with us with more integrity than some people do. And I do know that this isn't true of all Christians. I do know there are Christians who are really gracious and really trying to understand. I absolutely get that. Those Christians do exist, and we haven't spoken about any of those Christians on this episode. That's not because they don't exist, and that's not because we don't believe in them. We do know they exist. We do believe in them, and we have both featured them on our respective podcasts. But this isn't about them. Please, if you're one of those Christians, please encourage your other fellow Christians to be less of a dick and to just be a bit more gracious with us and to listen to what's going on, because it's only by having these genuine conversations between each other that will actually get somewhere in life. Thank you, David. I think I've genuinely run out, and I haven't even finished my beer.
Yeah, we've got. I think we've covered quite a bit of ground here. So
we have.
It's a little bit like shooting fish in a barrel, I have to say. But yes,
it is. It's a very easy target to hit, to attack people who are attacking us back. But I think we need to draw attention to it, and I think we need to draw attention to the wrong things that are going on. And I hope we've been fair. If you think that there's anything we've missed out or we've not been entirely fair, listeners, reasonpress@gmail.com, that is where to find us. Dave, how can people get hold of you?
Yeah, so the Graceful Atheist podcast is on all the major platforms. I'm on Twitter @Graceful Atheist. If you really, really want to get my attention, email me, gracefulatheist@gmail.com.
Excellent. And I'm sure that David will have a wonderful conversation with you if you want to appear on his podcast too. And with that said, please be gracious to each other. Good night. You have been listening to a podcast by Reason Press. To get in touch, email reasonpress@gmail.com or see our website, reasonpress.net, where you'll also find our book, Still Unbelievable. We welcome all feedback, and you might even end up on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. You can hear more of her music at soundcloud.com/hollybishop. You can support us by buying some of Holly's music and telling her we sent you.